with all my clients and myself included when I was going through my own treatment is before even starting any kind of exposure work, I was really heavily thrown into mindfulness and acceptance kind of skills and practices, really being able to go more into that observer mind and approach things with more of a genuine sense of openness and curiosity rather than any sort of foreign feeling or thought looking at it versus of looking at it as like a threat or a negative.
Welcome to OCD Whisperer podcast. Today with me, I have a special guest, Andrew Cohen, who's a dedicated OCD and anxiety specialist with extensive training and a wealth of professional and personal experience dealing with OCD. As a licensed marriage and family therapist and a board member of OCD SoCal, Andrew is deeply committed to providing effective treatment and providing advocacy and community building to individuals suffering from OCD and related disorders. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Yay!
Yay.
So you and I connected a little bit ago, and we talked about OCD, and kind of one of the subtypes or themes is this whole thing called Just Right OCD.
Mhm.
I think sometimes it also comes with Just Right or perfectionism, but they can be slightly different. There's overlap, of
Yeah,
course, but
absolutely.
let's just kind of start with that. Like, what is it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think the just right subtype of OCD, if you will, or the theme really has to do with feeling a certain way. And I like to think about it as like just so, I don't want to feel off. I don't want to feel different. I don't want to feel uncomfortable. And sometimes like these fears, it's not, I think a lot of times people think of OCD, they think of, oh, if I don't do this compulsion, this horrible thing's going to happen. Like kid's going to get hurt, or I'm going to lose my house, or the house is going to burn down. But a lot of times with just right OCD, it's like, well, if I don't do this, I'm just going to feel really off. And I can't sit and tolerate that off feeling, right? So a lot of times the compulsions are trying to make the person just get a sense of feeling a certain sensation, feeling, whatever it might be, getting rid of that off feeling.
Interesting. So it's not like it's per se some big fear or something like that that's kind of in the background. It's more just something doesn't feel good in the body. So you're just trying to kind of like regulate it and fix it.
Absolutely. Well, and I think it's not necessarily mutually exclusive too, because I think sometimes, when you do kind of dig a little bit deeper with clients and even myself, when I was dealing more with kind of the just right theme, is there is a little bit more to it. Like, so for example, mine was very much like, well, if I don't do this compulsion, I'm going to feel off. And then maybe I'm not going to be able to be totally present at this thing. And I'm going to kind of lose enjoyment. And I'm not going to be able to really be, involved in what I want to be involved in. So it does go, I think, a little bit deeper, but it's not necessarily a lot of times just like a catastrophic, horrible, horrible thing.
Yeah. And so like how does that overlap with perfectionism, right? Because like I'm sure like for you, when I work with clients, I'm thinking about people where they come and they might feel like the sudden, like let's say they bumped a shoulder on something and then suddenly they feel this urge to having to bump it on the other side. Or like I had a client once where like there was this thing about bodily symmetry and like
Mhm.
having to tap something a certain way to kind of feel that feeling. And sometimes it's even like pulling with clothing a certain way, even though it might not be symmetrical, but it feels right to the person in the brain. So, like, what's going on in the brain when that's happening?
Yeah, yeah. I think kind of like one of the biggest overlaps is this idea of it's completely subjective, right? There is no objective perfect. So it is solely based on feeling, right? And that's why, when someone's doing compulsions, it's just right OCD. So like, for example, one of my really big ones used to be when I was at the gym, if I was like working out and I was doing like, like arm curls with dumbbells. If I felt like my left side was a little bit different than my right, I would kind of have to sit there and adjust and adjust and adjust
Mm.
over and over and over and over again just to feel right. There was no like certain amount of times I had to do it, right? It was strictly based off this subjective sense of like, ah, like you can kind of take
Ah,
a breath,
mhm.
if you will. It's almost there's this like tension in you. And then when you kind of hit that, you get this like release. And I think with perfectionism, say someone's, wanting to write the perfect essay, right? They're erasing, rewriting, erasing, rewriting, erasing, rewriting. It's not like they're doing that a set number of times. It really is so they can get that sensation of like the
Yeah, it's funny when you say that because I know like one thing I had before I even realized when you was a CD was tracing, and I would trace a letter and I go
mm,
back and forth, and like letter A, oh my God. And sometimes really fast and then slower until finally I was like, oh, okay. And then like cross it out and then okay, start with B and then like go back to A. Like it was bizarre behavior, right? Like, and I had no idea that that's a compulsion, right?
absolutely.
But there's stuff like that that we all. I mean, I always say like as humans, we're so good at kind of covering things up, and we're very adjustable creatures. And
Mm.
it's like none of us, I would venture to say, are trying to do something out there that might seem weird that somebody's going to judge us. We don't want to be judged, right? So I think we develop a lot of internal strategies and other strategies to,
We're
right?
we're very, very, very good at hiding compulsions, and it's funny as you bring that up. I mean, you mind if I share a little bit
Yeah,
about
no, please.
OCD story and like where like how the Just Right kind of came in, if
Hmm.
you will. So I'm 31 now. I've had OCD I think since I was like 6, 7, 8-ish. And it started out with kind of themes of harm a lot, worry about harm coming to myself, and I won't go too much into detail. But basically, when the Just Right kind of stuff came about, I was probably like 16 or 17 years old. And this might get a little TMI, but we're talking about OCD here, so nothing's really off
It's all
limits.
good. This is a safe space. Let's
Yes.
do it.
So my kind of first experience with it had to do with feeling completely empty after going to the bathroom and sitting on the toilet basically when I was pooping, and to get this sensation of like complete emptiness. And it started out, it wasn't really that bad. I was on the toilet for like 5, 10 minutes, whatever it might be. But over the course of OCD going undiagnosed and not knowing what the hell was going on with me, there were times, probably on average, each bathroom session would be like upwards of an hour, hour and a half, and that would happen probably 2, 3 times a day, where I'm just sitting in there trying to get that sensation of just right. Right. And it was all also tied to like, well, what if, I have these uncomfortable feelings, I'm not able to be present, and I'm just going to not be able to stop thinking about it. Right. So you kind of, I'm sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent. What was the specific question? There was a reason I brought that up.
I love
I
it.
totally
Well, we were
forgot.
talking about the different ways that OCD, like how that internal pressure comes up with how we hide
Oh,
compulsions.
yes, 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 absolutely. So that one was kind of difficult to hide, obviously, because I was in the bathroom for a while. But what ended up happening was I had so many, I can't even tell you how many GI doctors I went to, thinking something was physically wrong with me and stuff. And all this time looking back, all these tests I had, it was really OCD behind the wheel. But after, or another addition to the Just Right OCD, and this is where I got really good at hiding, is I have no idea why, but do you know when you have that sensation to sneeze, right? And you're like,
Hmm.
but the chew doesn't come,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And it just feels really uncomfortable. So that happened to me. I remember it very distinctly. I was in Moore Park Community College bathroom, and I like had that sensation. I didn't sneeze, and then my brain was like, "Oh my God, this is really bad. What this is I can't handle this feeling. This is terrible. I need to sneeze. I need to sneeze." And I got so fixated on the need to sneeze that I actually didn't end up sneezing, I think, for like 2 weeks. I was constantly focused on it. And then I developed all these compulsions of like needing to go stare at the sun in the morning so I can make myself sneeze, or like put salt or pepper like in my nose to myself sneeze. So I got so sneaky at being able to just kind of like glance up and try to like make myself sneeze, or and nobody would really notice. And if no one was around, I would definitely, it would be like I was literally like looking up trying to make
Hmm.
myself sneeze. But it just gets so all encompassing, if you
Yeah, and here's the thing, as you're talking, right? Because these are all great examples. And the thing is, like, I know that in the media and with things that we talk about, there are some common or kind of, I guess, a little bit more known topics of OCD, right? But this is it, like, these are a couple of examples just because, like, as a specialist in this, I've certainly, worked with clients with, bathroom related OCD, like
will.
the one you described, sneezing. That's another one that's like not as commonly heard, right? But the
Yeah.
truth is, like, OCD brain can attach to anything. So I think,
Mhm.
can we take a moment and kind of step back for a second and just from your understanding, if you could just share with us and the audience, anybody that's listening that, maybe doesn't quite kind of find their OCD theme and the common themes that they know of, like what's something you could tell people to look out for? Like, right, because a lot of us have not didn't know it was OCD for a while, and we're doing all these behaviors and not understanding what it was until
Yeah.
finally you learned what it was. So now looking back, like in hindsight, right, what would you say to anybody listening? Like, what are the things you want to look out for that are going to be your clues
Yeah.
that this is probably something you want to go and get checked out?
Totally, totally. So I think to answer that, it's important just to give like kind of like the baseline definition that I like to give clients for OCD. Like, there's kind of the two components of it, right? So you have obsessions, you have compulsions. And to kind of make it simple, if you will, obsessions are really sort of any unwanted thought, but it's not always just a thought, right? This is where Just Right can come into. It can be an unwanted feeling or a sensation or an urge, something in your body that just it basically makes alarm bells go off, right? It makes that fight or flight response be like, oh, something's off. And we feel really distressed because of it, right? Most of the time, anxiety and fear, but also just depending on the content of the obsession, a lot of shame, guilt, sadness, anger, a lot of that. So when we feel those discomforting feelings, we then want to do something to get rid of them. And this is where the compulsions come in. Right. So the compulsions are any behavior we do to try to get rid of the distress that the obsession is causing. Right. And compulsions can be both physical, so something you can see somebody doing. So like, for example, with me, when I was at the gym, like having to readjust my arms over and over again, or like looking up at the sky to make myself sneeze, but also mental compulsions, right? Constantly analyzing, ruminating. It's like putting on a detective cap and you're trying to find the source code, if you will, of these obsessions. Why are they happening? How can I make them stop? And you're devoting all this energy into that. Meanwhile, life is kind of just passing you by, right? So OCD can latch onto anything. Whatever is going to get the sufferer's attention. Usually it's what's most important to them, right? And once it kind of has you in its grips, you start doing these compulsions and we start feeling better. We're teaching our brains that the obsessions are legitimate threats and we need to do these compulsions. So I would say, like, with any diagnosis, whether it's depression, social anxiety, PTSD, whatever it might be, nothing's really diagnosable until it starts having marked impact on our lives, right? Like, we're not able to function normally. We're not going to school, or we're not able to pay attention in school or our jobs. We're really missing out on being with our families, our friends. We're just so in our head all the time that you're just not living. You're alive, but you're not living. And I think, for me, it was manageable, I put in quotes, up until I hit 23 years old, when it just all came crashing down. And it was just way, way too intense. And I was to the point where, I was at my last quarter at UCLA, and it all just came to a head. And like, I was bedridden, I don't know how I ended up graduating, but I was non-functional. It doesn't have to get to that place, obviously, to realize something's going on. And if I knew what OCD was, growing up, I probably would have recognized, I think this is what I'm dealing with.
I think part of what I'm hearing too is kind of like for people to look out for. One is like if you're having like this sense of urge or urgency, like this pressure
Yeah.
to sense, like I have to do something about this thing. And you can't maybe identify the thing quite yet, but you just know you feel it and you feel scared, you're super anxious, like suddenly everything is just alarmed. And then, like, if you're doing behaviors or you start to, like, your behaviors can start, like you said, they were small initially, like with bathroom was 10 minutes maybe, and then suddenly hour and a half, 2 hours. So, like, I think that's a pretty important piece too, right? Like, if you're noticing there's an increase, like things are not resolving, they're actually
Yeah.
getting worse,
Yeah.
and you'll find you're doing more things and more time. Like, those are things to look out for.
And going off kind of that urgency thing, I always, like to say to clients, and this is something that I have to remind myself too, like if I'm having a sense of urgency to do something and there is not an actual life-threatening situation in front of me, this most likely is kind of OCD kind of trying to creep in, right? Unless my house is on fire and I'm in here and I need to run out, like that kind of urgency, I probably can let it sit for a bit. I don't have to do something about it immediately.
That touches on awareness, right? Because, and I think that's a big part of this work. Like I've been reflecting a lot around this, just with where I am in life personally. Like, I mean, I've been open, my mother's loss, et cetera. And, one of the things that I've thought of a lot is being how important it is to have that awareness of your own self, because that's really the only thing you have control over,
Mm.
period. Right. And like when a feeling arises, being able to pause just for a moment, to step back and kind of understand the context. Like,
Mm.
does this actually make sense with the current context that I have going on?
Yeah.
Or like to your point, there's no context. It's just this thing that's suddenly happening. Or like one of the things I've been tracking a little bit more is catching thought patterns and, increasingly more aware of, oh, when I start to think in this manner, that's very indicative of
Mm.
that OCD brain is on. Like I'm not looking through things with, my kind of glasses, like
Objective
OCD
lens, if
glasses
you
just got
will.
put on. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And like suddenly I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I'm getting skewed. Wait a second. There's a lot of extreme thinking here. It's very much all bad.
All doom.
It's always a negative. It's not like OCD goes, oh yeah, rainbows and butterflies, woo. Right? It's never like that. I mean, it's always this horrible, bad, negative. And so even being aware of the kind of thought process, and when it starts to get really heavily biased in that direction, to catch and go, wait a second, uh-oh, like I'm not thinking clearly, and I may still be bothered and I'm still feeling uncomfortable and unsettled, but at least I'm now aware and can recognize, okay, there's that place, like, this feels familiar. And to be able to say, just let that be. I don't have to do it. I don't have to do anything with this. I know I feel
Yeah.
like I want to, but I don't have to. And I just need to literally drop it, walk away, go do other stuff.
Yeah, no, 1,000%. And I'm sure we'll get into more like treatment and like what's helpful for it, but it really kind of brings up, I'm not sure how familiar you are with like Dr. Michael Greenberg's work at all about like
Hmm.
attention versus awareness and those kind of things. And the idea of being able to be aware, right? Like awareness, things come in and out of our awareness. We can't control that, right? But the attention we place on something, that is something that we can learn to kind of build that muscle. And I think with any subtype of OCD and just life in general, but especially that just right off kind of feeling, we can be aware that that feeling is there, right? We can create space for it, allow it to be there, and we can choose where we put our attention. And we're not putting our attention on other things to try to get the off feeling out of our awareness, but we're putting our attention on other things and allowing that off feeling to be there. They can kind of coexist, right? We create space for that off feeling, and then we can put our attention on what actually matters, which is life, being with friends, being with family, going to work, whatever it is. I mean, we all have different values. So, that's,
Yeah.
and that's why ACT as well is such a beneficial component to treatment. Get
Well,
into.
let's dive into this. I mean, it's a good
Okay.
segue to kind of bridge right into that, because that's one of my questions, right? So at this point, okay, if you're listening and we're talking about Just Right OCD, and we're talking about OCD in general, and kind of just globally, how do you recognize it? How just right? It's very much that feeling, and you're kind of looking for just that, like you said, that breath, that release.
Yeah.
So, what can someone do if they're dealing with this subtype of OCD? Because people talk about, well, I don't know if I need to do like per se an imaginal exposure, like a narrative.
Mhm.
If people are listening and they know what ERP is, that's one of the exposure strategies. Or right, some people might say, oh, how do I just sit with this unsettled feeling, if I'm supposed to quote unquote sit with it and accept it, like acceptance based work? Like,
Mhm.
what do I do with this?
With all my clients and myself included when I was going through my own treatment is before even starting any kind of exposure work, I was really heavily thrown into mindfulness and acceptance kind of skills and practices, really being able to go more into that observer mind and approach things with more of a genuine sense of openness and curiosity, rather than any sort of foreign feeling or thought, looking at it versus of looking at it as like a threat or a negative, kind of just being like, okay, that is interesting. I'm noticing that that thought is eliciting this discomfort in me. I'm noticing that the left side of my body feels a little bit more, I don't know, heavy than the right side right now. Or for example, with like the sneezing thing, I'm noticing that my head's feeling a little squishy right now, instead of being like, oh my God, my head's feeling this. This is bad. This means this means that. So being able to really slow down, go into that observer mode is going to be really, really crucial. And I think specifically kind of with this subtype, and, something I wanted to mention too, I think there can be a lot of overlap between like just right OCD and like sensory motor stuff too, right? Because like with the sneezing I was talking about, or, another thing that I had that definitely overlaps is, with yawning, I would have to get like the perfect yawn. And I was like fixated on like what a yawn would feel like and needing to get that like air in, all that kind of stuff. I think really hitting home on a lot of those mindfulness skills, and we can go into specific exercises if you want. And then after, doing that, ultimately when it comes down to ERP, we have to remove the compulsions, right? So, I think the response prevention component of ERP is going to be exceptionally crucial here, because you're exposed to the off feeling pretty much constantly. If not, then yeah, you're going to have to intentionally do it more, and you still can. But really, the response prevention component of practicing allowing that off feeling to be there, coexist with you. My OCD, I named it bitumen. So, allowing, for example, for me, like allowing bitumen to come along for the ride. It's like I'm in the driver's seat. You can sit in the passenger seat. It'd be nice if you were sitting in the trunk, but if you want to sit in the passenger seat, cool, right? But I got better shit to do. I got to go take care of my kid. I have clients I got to see. I have associates I have to supervise. There's important stuff that is going on. So I think without, like, I'd be curious your thoughts on this too, and how you go about treating it. But like, I don't see how you can go about doing good exposure work specifically with this or in general without really hitting a lot of mindfulness and acceptance skills.
Yeah, I mean, the word that comes to mind as you're talking is coexistence, right? And I think everybody tends to be so good at noticing so many little details and nuances, like to a point where it's too much, right? Where it
Mm-hmm.
becomes a little too much.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're so overly attending to all these different elements, we're so hyper aware. I think part of the challenge sometimes is not recognizing that we can get better at developing skills to expand our capacity to coexist with contradictory information. So, for example, where I can both feel like I want this thing because it's something that's important to me, right? So we can say it's a value. At the same time, I also feel, nervous or scared or ambivalent, right? So we have often coexisting things that aren't always all congruent. And I think there's this interesting misnomer, and I've certainly had this. I've been in this line of thought, when I was younger,
Yeah.
but it's really changed over time, which is this kind of, I think, notion of, oh no, like I have to, like, I'll get to this place where I'm gonna just feel really good most of the time, or I'm gonna learn these tools and everything's gonna be okay. And it's like, actually, no, just life. But forget any mental health or physical or any disorders, just life
Yeah.
already presents this contradiction. I mean,
Yeah.
right? There's day, there's night, there's life, there's death. Like there's contradiction all around in life.
Mm-hmm.
So if we just understand that in general, and then now you bring in OCD brain and you bring in, we are, human beings with which we lead with feelings. I mean, we are feeling beings.
Yeah.
If I walk into a room and it feels comfortable and fun, I instantly feel relaxed. If I walk in and suddenly for some reason I suddenly feel on guard, I might not yet logically understand why, but my body's already reacting, right? I'm already sensing and picking up. So like our feeling center is so there as kind of that part of our brain, right? Because we are Homo sapiens.
Yeah. Well, so all Bible based.
Yeah, we're so that's always operating. And I think it's a disservice to, not acknowledge that, like, look, you can have all of that and something else can be happening. And those two things don't always have to be in alignment and congruent. And that's okay, right? So I think that's a big piece, and maybe that was very wordy, but coexisting, right?
No,
Coexisting with contradictions.
absolutely, just very, very, very well said. I think I appreciate you saying kind of like we are Homo sapiens, and the idea like our mind, our brain is straight up just looking out for survival and for us to be safe. And I think when we really come into issues is when we get into this agenda where we're trying to control, the emotions our brain is throwing at us, or the thoughts or the sensations or the feelings, which are all directly out of our control, by the way. We start engaging in these behaviors that really ultimately start shrinking our lives and really get us a lot farther away from the person we want to be. Maybe we get to escape some difficult emotions at times, right? But that also does have tremendous costs. So, I think this idea of learning the acceptance piece of, and honestly, the Russ Harris, one of the ACT people, talks about thanking your mind whenever, you have like an unwanted thought or an uncomfortable feeling or sensation or whatever it might be. It's not like your brain's trying to just be an asshole, right? It's doing it because it's something sensing some sort of danger, right? And trying to fight that natural process creates so much more struggle than we need. Life is hard. Being human is hard, regardless of any diagnosis, right? Like you said, we all experience life. We all experience death. We all experience the ups and downs. So, being able to allow our body, our brain, our mind to be able to kind of throw what it's going to throw at us and be able to kind of be like, all right, this is here. And I also get to choose what I put my attention on. Again, not as a means to get rid of the unwanted, but as a means to kind of expand, create space for it, bring it along for the ride so that you can actually be present in what you want to do. Does that make sense?
Totally, exactly. I mean, this conversation just leads to that. I don't think there's any easy training that like, okay, I go through this 8-week program, poof, I'm done and I got this. It's like the reality is learning how to really understand your emotional mind or whatever you want to call it, but your emotions and when they speak to you, what was it really about? What's going on there?
Mhm.
Like that takes time and it just takes experience, really. Like I said to you, before we started the recording, like with my mom passing, it's like life checkmated me, right? Because life put me in a corner where I don't have an option to not feel with whatever feelings come up. Like this is it. Like you're like I can't just do a narrative and get this, to habituate. It's like, no, this is one of the, and that's what made me reflect on this to go, well, wait a minute. Here I am. A feeling comes, it's uncomfortable.
Mm.
I'm squirmy. I don't want it. I
Mm.
understand why. I understand the context, but your whole body is like, but the
Totally.
only thing you can do is just feel
Yeah.
it and release it. And whatever that is, if you need to cry it out or if you're just going to sit down for the day and be like, I'm just done for the day. I mean, whatever you need to do. I mean, if you can't do any of those things and, through with tears, you got to still pick up and trug along. I mean, we got to do what we got to do. But at the end of the day, it's also that remembering that that feeling does pass, right? Because then suddenly, even though I don't like it and I have my own opinions about the feeling,
Mhm.
but it's there. And
It's
so when
there.
I stop fighting it, and I could still be cussing under my breath, but I'm not fighting it, right? I'm not arguing with it. I'm not trying to solve. I'm just like, whatever. Oh, this is so annoying. Blah, 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 blah. That's
Totally.
fine, right? But then guess what? The next day or the day after you get up and suddenly it shifts, it passes, it softens, and it's like,
Yeah.
okay, poof, right? And so again, this is just one of those reflection moments. And what we're talking about here is I agree. I think there's especially with this just right, that's such feeling driven. And in general, learning how to understand your own feelings and not try to argue with them or try to make their existence, make it disappear or only have good feelings and not bad feelings. It's like, nah, man, this is not how it goes. And let's welcome all the feelings and you can not like it. You don't have to like it. You don't have to like any of it, but it's there. And if it's there, then let's accept reality of the
Absolutely.
moment.
Absolutely.
Right. And then let's get through the day. And maybe today, just accepting today's going to be just that crummy day.
Yeah.
All right, then there it is, right? But let's see what tomorrow brings.
Yeah. Well, and even, it's like sometimes even it's not even just like the rest of the day. It's like, okay, this moment right now is like this, but who the hell knows what the next moment's going to bring too? Because your emotions are our emotions very much like the weather in the sense that it can change constantly. So kind of also, tying it back to more like the just right off feeling, right? We want to treat that feeling like any other unwanted feeling in the sense that we don't have to like it, we don't have to want it, right? But accepting it really means just like, all right, this is here right now. If I try to push it away or get rid of it, I'm actually going more into denial mode of my current experience. And that really takes my energy away from what I really need to be putting my energy in, which is, what's important. So, it's so interesting because like, as we're talking about this, I think, I understand why we categorize different OCD themes. Like it can make it a little bit more simple to conceptualize or like treat or whatever it might be. But really what we're talking about, I think, applies to any OCD theme, but also just any unwanted thought or feeling or sensation a human being experiences.
Yeah,
Does that make sense? So,
totally. Yeah.
and exposure ERP is incredibly important because ERP is you're giving you're intentionally doing these things to practice these acceptance skills. You're doing these things to allow yourself to experience because we learn best by doing, right?
Yeah.
We can't just talk in logic. Like you can listen to this podcast episode, maybe gain some insights, but if you don't take that and practice it, they're just going to remain that insights, right? And
Yeah.
you're not going to actually be able to experience what we're talking about.
Andrew, thank you so much for this conversation. This was great. I feel like we've hit on so many different things and kind of deep dove. But before we end today, where can people find you if they'd like to find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, just like Christina, and have a group practice out in Westlake Village, California. So we do in person as well as virtual throughout the state of California. You can find us at CohenOCDtherapy.com. Also, our Instagram, I think, is also Cohen OCD Therapy. I need to get better at the social media stuff, but website for sure, CohenOCDtherapy.com. And then just kind of shout out to also OCD SoCal and the International OCD Foundation. If you or a loved one are experiencing this is new to you, a new diagnosis, maybe you're coming across this podcast for the first time, those resources, being able to find community and support. We just had our 1 million steps for OCD walk in Los Angeles and Santa Clarita Valley this past weekend. And it was so amazing being around all those people experiencing the same kind of condition and that community. Because I think another piece of this is how damn isolating OCD can be.
Okay.
So definitely give OCD SoCal and the IOCDF a follow on Instagram. I don't know if they're on TikTok or anything like that. Again, not great with social. So yeah.
Awesome. And I'll include your links in the show notes. And thanks so much for coming.
Absolutely. This was so much fun. I would love to come back whenever. Talk so much about all this stuff.